What do we know about the Valyrian steel sword Brightroar that once belonged to House Lannister, and where is it now? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please do check out their amazing podcast and YouTube channel. There's a link in the description. Since ancient times, many houses of Westeros have kept famous swords, named and wielded by the lord of the house, or occasionally the heir or another relative. These blades were undoubtedly fine weapons, expertly crafted and perhaps richly decorated. Their purpose was to indicate status and represent the lord's authority to mete out justice and war. And the sword's famous name was seemingly often passed from one sword to another when that got too old. Centuries later, when the chance came for these ancient blades to be supplanted by the far superior Valyrian steel, many houses leapt at the chance. House Stark and House Corbray replaced their ancient swords, Ice and Lady Forlorn, with new Valyrian steel versions, and House Lannister wanted the same, but they had a problem. The Valyrians didn't want to sell to them. We're told in The World of Ice and Fire that there is no evidence the Dragon Lords ever made contact with the Lannisters, and were even given a reason, a prophecy that the gold of Casterly Rock would destroy them. There's a whole rabbit hole there if you want to go down it, about the possible connection to the causes of the Doom of Valyria, and I did a whole video there, but the key point for us is that despite this, the Lannisters did manage to get their hands on a Valyrian steel sword. The language used in The World of Ice and Fire about how they got it is, I think, deliberately vague, simply saying that Brightroar came into the possession of the Lannister kings in the century before the Doom, and it is said that the weight of gold they paid for it would have been enough to raise an army. So they bought it, but it's almost certainly not from the Valyrians, who they never came into contact with, and they bought it for a lot of money. Its most famous user was probably King Lancel IV Lannister, who is said to have beheaded both the Ironborn King Harold Halfdrowned and his heir with a single swing, so sharp was it. In The Sworn Sword, Sir Eustace Osgrey claims it was the Valyrian steel version of Brightroar that King Lancel wielded against his ancestor Sir Wilbert and King Harold Halfdrowned, but that seems unlikely given the known timeline. Thankfully, it's not the only exaggerated part of Sir Eustace's story, so it's easy enough to reconcile. Either way, it's clear that Brightroar was a storied and feared weapon. Unlike their ceremonial counterparts, these new Valyrian steel ancestral swords like Brightroar could be more safely wielded in war. Even the finest castle-forged steel will nick or outright break when exposed to the rigours of the battlefield, but nothing holds an edge like Valyrian steel, they say, and it's true. In this context, it's probably worth noting that Brightroar is described as a great sword, which normally would only be used by the largest of men, as they would be so heavy, but Valyrian steel is light as well as sharp, so it's likely Brightroar was functional as well as ceremonial. In case you're wondering, we know of only two other Valyrian steel great swords, Ice of House Stark, which is mostly ceremonial and for use in dispensing justice, and Heartsbane of House Tarly, which is definitely used in real combat situations, despite Randyll Tarly not being described as a particularly large man. So Brightroar probably was a combat weapon, and that is probably at least part of why King Tommen II Lannister took it with him when he took the Lannister fleet to Valyria, hoping to plunder the ruined freehold. We're not told an exact date when he did this, but certainly it was sometime in the years immediately following the Doom. No doubt this will have been seen as a high-risk, high-reward expedition. Since the Doom, various armies, fleets, and even a dragon had ventured to explore whatever remained of the peninsula, and none had returned. So no one knew exactly what was there, hence the desire to bring a Valyrian steel sword, I assume. Everyone knew what had been there, of course, much, much more Valyrian steel, gold, riches, and sorcerer's secrets, and if anyone could return with even half a holdful, it would be worth all manner of trouble. On his way to Valyria, he had his fleet stop in Volantis for supplies. Volantis was the closest surviving city to Valyria and populated by many relatives of those killed in the Doom. According to Volantene Chronicles, the Triarchs lavished him with gifts, and in return he pledged to give them half of whatever his expedition discovered. but they never returned. The following year, one of the Triarchs sent a squadron of ships to search for any sign of them, but they failed to do so. Could such a large and powerful fleet simply disappear like that, with no trace whatsoever? Yes, it would appear. There is, of course, a possibility that the Volantines are lying. Lulling Tommen into a false sense of security, they could have assaulted the Lannister Golden Fleet, taking it by surprise. They could have taken much wealth, with Brightroar itself as the biggest prize. Given that the sword cost enough to purchase an entire army before the Doom, when Valyrian steel could still be made, imagine the worth of Brightroar and its counterparts afterwards, when the secret of their forging was lost forever. Even now, Brightroar could be sitting in the manse of a Volantine elite, safe within their famous black walls. It could have a new hilt, as Longclaw was given, or, in a parallel to what Tywin did to Ice, the thieves could have melted Brightroar down to forge anew, as a pair of smaller blades. Perhaps. We can't rule it out. But still, maybe the Volantines just saw an opportunity to plunder some of the riches of old Valyria itself, at no risk to Volantine lives. They negotiated 50% of whatever Tommen found, remember, in return for their gifts and an offer to help out if needed. This was clearly before sailors simply refused to sail to Valyria, so a trip there would have seemed incredibly dangerous, but not a guaranteed death sentence. So probably Brightroar went with Tommen II to Valyria and is still there. Whatever horrors are there wiped out him and his entire fleet and crew. That's certainly what the Lannisters think happened. There's no mention of an investigation by House Lannister, at least until centuries later. Tyrion and Jaime's favourite uncle Gerion, Tywin's youngest brother, attempted to repeat King Tommen II's quest, hoping for a better outcome, and most importantly, to recover Brightroar itself. He was their favourite because he had a similar mocking sense of humour and an overall similar personality from what we can tell, including the requisite rocky relationship with Lord Tywin. Gerion Lannister had previously toured the Free Cities, giving him at least minimal experience in the region, but beyond that, he may have only had maps, books and stories. Nor do we hear of any, shall we say, less challenging quests that he undertook earlier. Sailing to a place that swallowed an entire Lannister fleet, not to mention a dragon and an army, is quite bold for a first-time adventurer. But that might be the point. A recurring theme with Tywin and his brothers is that they all lived in his shadow, and it was a long and tall shadow indeed. Tywin was a far greater talent than any of them, and was the firstborn besides, the biggest privilege of all in that society. There was no path to matching Tywin's career as Hand of the King or his status as Lord of Casterly Rock. Their sister Jenna had once said that Gerion handled his brother's abundance of advantages by mocking the Game of Thrones Tywin had been embroiled in since his youth. Cersei famously said, "You win or you die," but Gerion believed it was better to mock the game than to play it and lose. If there was no ordinary means of matching his brother, perhaps there was an extraordinary one. Recovering Brightroar would have been a deed forever enshrined in Lannister history, if not the history of all Westeros. It seems he aimed to overshadow his brother's extraordinary and long career with a single grand stroke. Yet, how many other stories do we have of successful treasure hunts on the blasted Valyrian Peninsula? Only one. That of Euron Greyjoy, and it's quite possible, if not likely, that his case is just that, a story. All of the Crow's Eyes tales should be taken with a grain of salt, and all witnesses to it have had their tongues ripped out. Instead of an entire fleet, Gerion took a single ship, the Laughing Lion. Not that his brother Lord Tywin would have allowed him to take more ships. He thought the plan was foolish, and it's hard to argue with that assessment. It's not simply a matter of hindsight either, many others agreed at the time. Knowing what people would think, Gerion apparently didn't inform his crew of the full extent of his plans when they departed from Casterly Rock, and when he did, half of them deserted. They understood the lesson of history that he did not. Sailing to Valyria meant death. Perhaps Tommen's expedition had been the one to convince other sailors of the folly of going to Valyria, or perhaps there had been even more attempts after that we don't know about, but by Gerion's time it was firmly embedded in seafarer law. You don't go to the Smoking Sea. And to be clear, we're talking here about the year 291 AC, so less than a decade before the main story begins. Robert Baratheon is on the throne, Tywin, Lord of Casterly Rock, and perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, Tommen is born, presumably named after Tommen II, in whose footsteps Gerion was setting off. Anyway, Gerion's crew deserted when he took the Laughing Lion to port at Volantis, just like King Tommen II had, at which point this was presumably provoked by him telling them where they were going next. Curiously, instead of lavish gifts and exchanges of promises with the Triarchs, as with Tommen, we hear nothing at all of contact between them and Gerion. Instead, he busied himself with purchasing slaves to replenish his crew, and then resumed his journey. The decision to hire slaves is, of course, quite jarring for a Lannister who was presumably against such practices, but speaks of how committed he was to actually going to Valyria, and there would be no excuses or turning back. And then he set off, and we hear no more. Another Lannister, the lords and kings of the West, vanished in the East. We know what we know only because Lord Tywin sent agents to find out what happened to his brother, which is how he learned about those desertions, perhaps from some of the deserters. From there, the trail went cold, and how not? If the Laughing Lion had been swallowed by the sea, there would be no trace, and the searchers would have been unlikely to risk their own lives just to find some wreckage or the like. As I said earlier, Gerion was undoubtedly reckless, though perhaps that reputation is due to this doomed expedition. From the outside, it will have appeared mad, but from Gerion's perspective, recovering Brightroar was the only task in the world that could make him as famous as his brother, if not more so. He would have been a Lannister legend forever. Instead, he's just a lamented footnote in the family history, and Brightroar remains missing. Not that Brightroar therefore plays no role in the main story. On the contrary, its absence, and Tywin's apparent determination that House Lannister must have a Valyrian steel sword to replace it, is a significant driver of the action. As we noted earlier, possession of a Valyrian steel sword was a matter of great pride for noble houses in Westeros, and Tywin was nothing if not proud. It must have rankled with him that the Lannisters had lost theirs in what must have seemed to him a very foolish way. Then his own brother had perished in a foolish attempt to recover it. So he set himself to get a replacement. We're told that he tried to buy one from other poorer houses several times, but they always refused, no matter how much gold he offered. Then some Valyrian steel fell into his lap. Ned Stark's sword Ice, and he couldn't resist. He had it reforged into 2 swords. Why 2? Well, it was big enough, and so he could provide a Valyrian steel sword for both his son Jaime, who he still planned on naming his heir as Lord of Casterly Rock, and his grandson Joffrey, the king. So the Lannisters and the Lannister offshoot, the royal line of House Baratheon via Cersei, not their official title, but you get what I mean, would both get Valyrian steel. And of course, his rivals, the Starks, lost theirs. The timing here is noticeable. Tywin instructs Tobbo Mott to reforge those 2 swords at least a month before the Red Wedding takes place. House Stark is very much still alive and well at that point, though Tywin was surely already negotiating what would happen at the Red Wedding, so he isn't here claiming Valyrian steel from a vanquished or destroyed house, but taking it from a rival. Remember how angry he was that Ned had been beheaded, because it meant that it would be much harder to negotiate with the Starks. Well, this is a clear sign that any thought of negotiation had now long departed from his mind, and quite how much he wanted that Valyrian steel sword to have a replacement for Brightroar. That desire to replace Brightroar has led to the creation of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail. Ironically, after all that effort on his part, neither new sword ended up with the person he intended. Joffrey died the day he was given Widow's Wail, and Jaime, probably even more painfully for Tywin, first rejected once again the chance to be Lord of Casterly Rock, and then gave Oathkeeper to Brienne. Once more, House Lannister is without a Valyrian steel sword. Brightroar was undoubtedly an impressive sword, but its significance in this story is more in its absence than its presence. What role might Gerion have played had he not been lost in trying to find it? How much did Tywin's desire for a replacement affect his actions? What deeds will the wielders of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail accomplish before the story ends? Brightroar has been gone for more than 300 years. but it still has a role to play. If you'd like to see more videos like this, diving deep into the world of Ice and Fire, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.